I like to talk in lay common language so people will understand. I do have like a referral packet from
you're going to leave that with me, right?
Alzheimer's Society Against Dementia, if I need to reference something. So
so if you hear paper rattling,
I'm going to try not to, but it just kind of wherever our conversation leads. Does that make sense if I don't know it off the top of my head?
Absolutely.
Okay. So the first thing, education-wise, and we talk about this so much, is dementia and Alzheimer's, right? So some people get a dementia diagnosis. Some people get Alzheimer's diagnosis. And in many ways, we think most people don't know, like, the difference, or is there a difference, or why this diagnosis and not the other. I've heard people say, well, they have dementia but not Alzheimer's yet. So the first thing to do is to define what words are, right? So dementia is, and based on how you read it, but it is a collection of symptoms caused by a disease. So dementia is really not the disease. It's an umbrella term. And it kind of identifies like the symptoms and signs. So to the basics, dementia means impairment of the brain. So if you have that aspect, most people don't know what dementia really means. So if you think about it is the impairment of the brain, then you start to realize what's really going on. And Alzheimer's is the most common dementia. So, educationally we use dementia as the umbrella term, and Alzheimer's is a dementia. And there are a lot of different types of dementias. So, there's Lewy body, FTD, different types. And sadly, the most sure way to figure out which kind it is after death at an autopsy. Now, there are some things coming along that through a test, maybe some spinal taps or whatever, like they can tell some differences, but an MRI or a PET scan is not the surefire way to figure it out.
And for those who are new to the podcast, my dad had dementia Lewy body with Parkinson's symptoms, and my mom has Alzheimer's. And I know that it was really easy to diagnose my dad because of the Parkinson-like symptoms and the hallucinations. Mm-hmm. And not so easy, except now we know that Mom has, I just call it regular Alzheimer's because she can speak and other things. So I know there's frontal lobe, and I don't know if you'll talk about that, but I just want to give everyone an idea of where we are, where I am in that understanding.
Yes. So, and many times a lot of patients don't get a sure disease diagnosis. You get a dementia diagnosis. And a lot of times that has to do with who diagnosed you. You kind of think about if a primary care physician gave the diagnosis, someone who is not as specialized, they recognize that you have a dementia, but they do not recognize what type. And also it's the symptoms that presents itself. So in many of the dementias, of course, they are intertwined. So like they have some of the same common symptoms. So it's trying to figure out which one based on those symptoms. So knowing that dementia is impairment of the brain, that should be important to caregivers, family members, that professionals that take care of someone diagnosed. Because I have a question. I'll ask you, Theba. What does the brain control?
Your senses? No. Oh my gosh.
Guess what? Everything. That's your control.
Oh, yes, of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So when we think of dementia, we don't really think of it's the control center of your whole body.
Oh, yeah, well, that would make sense because Dad shook his arm. It was motor and shuffled his feet. Okay, makes sense.
Then you start to think about symptoms and the signs and symptoms that you see. Everything literally can be affected. So when you see one dementia patient, you've seen one, because everybody could have different symptoms based on what part of the brain is affected, personality, how people are, just different parts of your brain. So it's hard to distinguish, but when you really think about if it is felt impairment of the brain and your brain controls everything, what does that mean is going to happen or could happen? So your body temperature.
Oh, yeah. Dad had regulated really weird body temperature. Mom does too.
Yes. So, they a lot of times they're more cold than hot. But so it could be really, really cold, and they put a lot of clothes on because they're cold. Because they're cold. It's hot, but they put a lot of clothes on, right? That happens a lot. So sometimes people start to layer a lot. So that their body temperatures are off. A lot of times with senses, so you brought up senses, processing more than sense. Of course, their senses will be affected, but sometimes it's the processing. So it's not that I didn't hear you. I need time to process what I heard. So a lot of times people will say, my love, I think they have hearing issues. But the issue is not hearing, it's processing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So visually, it may be the processing of what they see. So, some people can't read anymore. Letters don't make sense. Depth issues, like knowing if the floor is level. I've heard people so black and white tile, black looks like a hole.
Right.
So there's even a trick that people use if people are trying to wonder, if you put a black spot in front of the door, like a rug or something, they won't go past the rug because it looks like a hole if they have depth perception.
Yeah, I know I've talked to you about this before, but my mom, and this has been going on for a couple of years now, when she's watching TV, everyone has really long fingers or arms. She's constantly, look how long her arms are. Look how long her fingers are. Real obsessive about and shocked by it.
Yeah, so her vision, her processing is different from, she's just processing different.
Yeah. Yeah, and she's obsessed with crowds. So, yes, we might be watching a football game or a tennis match or golf the other day, and she's not watching the golfer. She's constantly commenting about, look at those crowds. Can you believe those crowds, Theba? All those people in one spot? I find some of her comments very interesting.
And what she focuses on, right? So TV can be, at some point in the disease, I've heard people, TV may not be beneficial and cause more issues because, especially as memory is affected and hallucinations, delusions, like not being able to tell the difference between life and television.
Right. Dad's deal was I'd go over and watch football and tennis with him because we'd been doing that all of our life, and he was a tennis pro. But he would look over at me, and again, this was early on and very confusing to me, and he'd go, that's not football. They're not playing like football anymore. They're acting. His perception, and then tennis, something he's played all his life, was not the same game. And that's now, this is before he started hinting around that he was seeing things that weren't there, because he was very careful at the beginning with me, because I think he was just nervous.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just really threw me. He just couldn't keep up with it. He thought they changed the way tennis scored. So these are things that you begin to like take in and like, wow.
Yeah, so a lot of times with, especially Alzheimer's, when you ask people what it is, we define it as like a memory disease. And as you have experienced, probably like memory was not the first signs that you really observed in your mother.
Her getting confused was the first sign. Confused about whether her sister had passed, confused about where she was going, confused about she took a Coke out of the refrigerator and put it on the table and then took a shower and came out and thought somebody was in the house and had put... So there were things happening more than anything else. Until then, it became apparent later that it was memory.
Yes. So, and a lot of times families see money issues because you can't do simple math and money anymore. So sometimes there's things like, won't go out anymore. So things happen in different stages for different people. So they don't want to go out because they don't feel comfortable anymore.
Yeah, things are loud.
Things are loud.
I think I shared with you recently, I don't know if it was during a podcast, but Mom doesn't want to leave the house anymore to go on our day trips. We would just go out somewhere once a week. And I was thankful. Again, she's verbal, so that does help me. But getting that information out of her can be extremely difficult, and I have to keep kind of trying and being patient. And then finally she said, it's too big out here, basically, or too many people, she said. There's just too many people. So she just didn't want to go shopping anymore or lunch, and that was okay. She said, I just want to be home.
Too much stimulation out there, too many things going on out there, and we don't think about it, right? So the things we don't really think about either is the processes, right, that can make her very uncomfortable. We talked about before at the beginning, you're like, well, we thought about being outside, but it's kind of noisy. So we're able in a large room to differentiate between, there could be conversations going on at another table, your conversation, there could be people coming in and out of a door, and our brain is able to separate. We don't really realize how magnificent this brain is, right? Mm-hmm. So, music could be going on, our brain is able to process and put things in compartments, and we can tune out certain things. But think about not being able to process a room full of noises. Right? Somebody drops something in the kitchen. Somebody's on their phone laughing. Like all the things. The fan and if there's a ceiling fan above you, we can tune most of that stuff out. But if your processing is off, think about how chaotic that would be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something we don't really, we focus too much on memory issues and less on understanding their processing. Because a lot of times I think you're right. I think my mom hears what I say, and I'll repeat it, but by then she knows what I said. Like she had to take the time, and she goes, well, thank you for pronunciating. But I didn't think I said it any louder. Maybe I did, but she's always like, I can't understand you mumble. Now, a lot of times I'm talking to her because we're sitting right beside each other watching TV, so I'm not directly in front of her, and I know that I was told that that's the best way to communicate with them is right in front of them. Mm-hmm.
So communication is 80% of it is not what you say, it's your tone, your facial expression. So being able to see your face, maybe even read your lips some, helps in communication. So slowing down. So research says at some point in the disease, like a person can't remember 10 words or every 10 words, excuse me. But then it goes to every 4 words, right? So as you say something and maybe they hear one part of your sentence or one word and they're kind of trying to process that word, they really haven't heard what you said. Mm-hmm. So if that makes sense. Excuse me. So I'm going to take a drink of water.
Yeah, it's February with spring-like temperatures, and so our brains are thinking that it is spring. So are our allergies.
So are our allergies and
So we're going to come back to those particular examples, but what I learned in the very first class I took in Saw Real is parts of the brain are shrinking and dying. Mm-hmm. So we have to consider, like the slide that I saw, which was a real picture, was these black holes. Mm-hmm. And she tried to explain that, they're trying to, I'm going to use the word process now because I like that better instead of memory.
Yes.
Trying to process something, and it's hitting that hole and having to get around that hole, jump over that hole, or just stop. I think. Does that make sense?
So
did I say that right?
I use a kind of I like to use a car starter, like when your car is started. So when the starter is functioning well, you go out there, you turn the ignition, and everything starts, right? It's it's electrical too, so it sparks and everything starts to work. Now, if you have ever had a starter issue and
spark plug thing
or a spark plug, and you try to turn, even the ignition, like it's trying to fire, but it's not connecting.
Okay, that's a good example.
It's not connecting, and the one thing about usually like starters, I haven't had starter problems in a long time, thank God, but I remember having some. Is like a lot of times it doesn't go all the way out. Like as soon as you go out there, like one time, oh, my starter. You usually go, it starts. A little while later, it's longer. It's not fire. So the starter kind of work. It's kind of going out. It doesn't usually go out all at once. And then one day it's like dead, right? But it really is like electrical. They have to. All of those electrical, it's like misfiring.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good picture for those that are listening, that there's misfiring because there's gaps, holes, dead parts, shrinking parts.
Won't let it connect.
So it's not connecting. So that makes sense with speech. Might hear 1 or 2 words. It just reminds me too of, because I do just talk to fill in the air for her, just to, if we're going to lay there and we're not really watching TV, I will be watching something or maybe we are watching TV together, but I know she's not watching it because she's playing solitaire on the computer, but I'll say something like, well, I cannot believe he did that. And I'll just say it to say it, and then she's like, what? And then I've got to really repeat it. So sometimes I guess that my point of bringing that up is I realize all she wants me to be is there. I don't have to talk all the time, and I don't talk all the time, but I don't have to feel like we still make assumptions that they are feeling ignored or, back in the day, of course, before all this started happening, if I was on my computer or just sitting here, it would be offensive to her if I never engaged in a conversation with her.
So that's an interesting point. So I'm going to talk about women, because not that it's always true, but the one experience I had with a wife. So she was like, I'm getting a hard time getting my husband to do things and like processing, understand. And we kind of talked about it, but she was like, for some reason, my son, when he comes over, it's kind of like he does what he says and like he follows directions better, and I don't know what it is. So I kind of talked her through like the experience. And the one thing is she talked too much, really. So she tried to fill in gaps. And she gave a lot of information at the same time. So think about the processing. So instead of say it was shower time, like, oh, it's time for a shower, take your clothes off, and da 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 da, and we're gonna do this, and isn't it beautiful outside? And like just filling in and like talking. Well, her son, who was not a talker, when he came over, he like, take a bath. And like it was just so short, so precise, so direct, little words that it was easier for him to understand.
Well, interestingly, again, it's not so much that she wants to hear from me, but she wants to be heard when she does say something. And sometimes I'll be preoccupied, and then I'll hear her go, well, I might as well just be talking to myself. Now, basically, she's just saying stuff like, oh, aren't those two dogs walking with those people? Aren't they cute? And I didn't look over. I barely heard what she said because I was preoccupied, maybe with something I was studying, or I had my earphones in. And so what I'm realizing is she wants to be responded to. She doesn't necessarily want me to be telling her a bunch of stuff. And that's part of that emotional intelligence that you talked about the other time. It's just, one of the things that I put on my Facebook page today, just reminding people that Mom doesn't want to go walking anymore, but right now I ask her if she wants to. I know the answer, and there's no pressure, so she doesn't feel like any pressure. So she'll go, no, and I'm like, okay, I'll be right back. But I still engage her in the decision-making process. And then I put on there, when it comes to showers, there's no negotiating. So the one battle we have is that.
So you also provide her with a sense of empowering her to make decisions and still giving her a sense of independence. So giving her a choice, although you know the answer, is still a matter of like, I get to make the choice. I'm empowered to say yes, no.
And she's feeling included.
Yes. So all of those things keep her emotionally together. Now, taking a shower, that's like a conversation that is one of those things. So let's talk about taking a shower, right? So there's a few things that can happen with taking a shower that we really don't sometimes recognize. So let's go back to the brain, what it controls, everything, right? A lot of times a shower is no longer comfortable. So pay attention to a few things. So we talked about temperature, how warm. Sometimes it needs to be warmer than normal because she has to take her clothes off. Sometimes a shower is painful.
I think that was for my father's because of his Lewy body. Apparently the water was
your nerves. If your nerve endings are sensitive, and the water comes down.
Yeah, very uncomfortable for him.
It can be uncomfortable. So those are some things to consider. Also, sense of smell may be gone, so they don't know they need a shower. Your feeling is off, so you don't feel like you need a shower. Your time is off, so you think you took a shower already.
All those are in place.
All those things are in place, right? So you said something very smart, and earlier we were talking, and he's like, if she knows she's going somewhere or somebody's coming over, she'll take a shower, right? So a lot of times I ask caregivers and families to figure out why they will take a shower. So, we're in the South, so there's two reasons people love will take a shower. Church and the doctor. If they're going to take a shower or bathe when it's time to go to church. And they will do it for the doctor as well.
Right.
So you may have to tell them they're going to the doctor a lot or church or whatever they go to church. It's a lady that she told me her mother would bathe for the casino. So she would always tell her that she was going to go to the casino later. We're going to the casino later. Right.
Yeah. I have not yet got a definitive reason. All Mom keeps saying is I hate showers. She will not tell me because we get it warm. We get the temperature just, and then once she's in there, she's fine. And then but it does exhaust her, and that's something else to keep in mind. The decision-making process while in the shower can be exhausting. Oh, I got a shampoo. I got a soap. She feels like she has to shave each time. It's just typical things that, and then because I know, because she's like, afterwards she goes, I'm exhausted. So I always dry her hair for her. But she has not given me, my dad at least was able to verbalize to the caregiver, it hurts. And they couldn't, they thought it was temperature. And they would get what the and it wasn't, it was the feeling. And I learned in classes later that usually it's the feeling of the water is uncomfortable.
It's like spikes. Like, we don't really think about it. The other thing is, I don't know, based on generation, when did they start taking showers? Like, people used to bathe, not shower.
Mom was big into baths because her mom was big into the baths.
So she may be more into baths than showers.
Yeah. But she won't do a bath now. But she was big into baths. But she would rather be in the shower because she's too scared to get up and down even if I'm there. And she took baths because she enjoyed the relaxation. So that's how she would make that particular decision. Now she just wants to get it over with.
Yeah, but to think about, she doesn't like showers. Like, her thoughts aren't linear, like we just talked about it. I don't like showers. She doesn't like showers. That does not mean she wants a bath. She knows she does not like showers. At one point in her life, she loved baths. So when you say it's time to shower,
good point.
She does not like showers.
Yeah, I'm going to throw something at her Friday, because Friday's shower day, because we have friends that come over and play dominoes with us. So, but I might say, you want to take a bath? I just want to see what she might say.
Yeah.
Because it's been so long. Because I have a walk-in shower, so there's no stepping over. I've got a chair in there. It doesn't really look like a chair, but it's a chair just in case I ever wanted to sit down, I guess. But really in case she ever wanted to sit down. But that's a good point. What I'm hearing is, wow, just wrapping your mind around. I would never have thought about bath and shower, because that is something that, like, her mom always got in the bath, got down in the bath. She always did that with me growing up. And so very technical. All right, so let's come back around to our topic today. Obviously, is we're talking about examples of what is happening to the brain. We touched on the fact that to really give you a picture, and we encourage you to go online and look at some of the real slides and the graphics, because again, what you're saying is they get an idea about this because it's in the autopsy that they usually are able to take these pictures. Now, I know that my dad did a scan. So while they're alive, you can do a scan that gives you an idea of what's going on. But the reason that's not real common to have that done is because it's very traumatic for them. You're asking an Alzheimer's patient. Now, we were able to do it at the front end, and also Mom. So there probably wasn't, since we were able to do it on the front end of the disease where they could make a decision and it wasn't as scary, there would be no way in God's green earth I could do that today or towards it later, because you're putting them in something, you're away, it's just too traumatic. So again, that's why in death they probably have, they have a more accurate description of what the brain looked like right then, if they do an autopsy. I mean, I think that's a good point. I always thought about maybe making Mom available. We didn't think about that with Dad, to give for research. to have them be able to, if they wanted the opportunity to study his brain with Lewy body. But yeah, so what we can tell you, it's more dramatic, obviously, at the end, but slowly but surely, as the stages of the brain it's shrinking. And I think that makes sense to me why, you and I talk about their world becomes smaller. So, you see outwardly that their world is becoming smaller. Mom doesn't want to go on walks anymore around the neighborhood. Her comfort zone is the back porch or the front porch, as Carolyn knows, because Carolyn rolls up and catches her there every time if it's pretty. But and so I know that, like, I was taught in a class not to walk up behind them and touch them, or even to the side, because we have to remember that, as Carolyn was saying about the brain controls everything, it's also the visual. If my mom and dad aren't seeing the TV right, and she seems obsessed with long hands and long arms, then it makes sense that their vision.
So it's really going tunnel, like, yes. So it's closing in, and it gets smaller and smaller. So today I was asked about people that hold their head down, like they almost, like their vision, they almost can't see. So if you think about blind people and people that can't see, or even limited vision, they tend to hold their head down because they can't see farther out.
Okay.
So when they start to hold their head down, a lot of times it's like their vision is affected.
Yeah, Dad did that a lot. I haven't seen Mom do it too much yet. But yeah, that makes sense too. Wow, it's such a fascinating disease. And, you're going to always hear examples on this podcast and other podcasts that you cannot, what's the saying? One doesn't fit all.
Yeah.
What's that saying?
You're saying one, you don't.
You don't.
You're saying one. You're saying one. So talking about everything. So the ability to taste and swallow. Also, like your taste buds change. So what they eat change. Swallowing is.
Oh goodness, Dad
thing.
had that. Man, he would freak himself out because he couldn't swallow just right. And he would choke a little bit, but it wasn't what you thought. Like it seemed like it would happen after he'd swallowed, and then he would get choked up, and he thought that he couldn't breathe, and he could speak, but it was so traumatic to him. And I know also that as people age, their larynx softens, the muscles soften. I know Mom's is starting to soften. That's why their voice changes. But Dad's larynx, if I'm even saying it right, shifted a little bit. Like at first we got him checked out because we thought maybe he had a growth, and it wasn't. It had shifted. So swallowing began to be really an issue of a panic for Dad. And we'd have to kind of talk him through it. He would get it in his mind something was wrong. It was very interesting.
Yeah. People forget how to chew. So chew, swallow, all of those things come along with the disease. So remembering, so I'm always reminding loved ones that it is a brain impairment. So we can't think of the disease. It's not good. It gives you more insight to say, okay, it is a brain issue, a brain disorder, a brain disease. Their brain is impaired.
Okay.
And if I can take them back to the question, like I ask you, like, what does the brain control?
Yeah.
And it's the control center of your body.
So what that helps me understand more and more, and I hope you all, is that if you can look at it that way instead of a memory issue, and I know we've talked about this already, but it's helping me because impairment makes a lot more sense, and again, it brings about more empathy and patience and understanding, because it's going to be different every day.
Yes.
So
And that's
sure,
why I
I've
kinda
already
use this
yeah.
misfiring too, because the thing about it is, what if that one today you get a gift that the connection connect and something seems better, or they get something that they hadn't got. Have you had those experiences before? Like, I can't believe she remembered that, or she said, or today seemed to be like a okay day.
Yeah, normal. And that'll throw you.
That'll throw you, right? So today you have a gift of like things are connecting a little.
Yeah, and you know, you and I've talked about this. One of the reasons I quit my job and I stay home with her is to create a calmer, less anxiety atmosphere. Because for years she's been able to stay at home, but I did not understand and realize that being alone was frightening to her. So that made sense to me because, again, I'm going to go on the misfiring. If weird things are happening in your brain and you're by yourself, that's going to be frightening. So she, you know, this comes back to the emotional intelligence that you talked about. The reality is that they're aware something's wrong. They may not talk about it.
Or even are able to communicate it.
Yeah, it's or maybe afraid, they want to even communicate, but they're afraid of what, is that my phone doing that?
I think it's your phone, dear.
Well, that's so weird. Sorry, guys. I don't know if they hear that anyway. I think we did. Well, no, they probably did. Ignore the phone. I feel like it was like the microwave or the oven telling me something's on. It was weird. It was like 3 dings in a row. I was like, what is going on? What was I talking about before? See how that ding just threw me off?
That ding just
threw me off. But just her...
you were saying how she couldn't stay at home because she was...
Yeah, I didn't realize she was afraid. Now, at the very beginning, the odd thing is, because I worked from home because of the pandemic, she would forget I was there and then become afraid and be really glad when she saw me, you know? So that's how I knew that she was frightened or something like that. But there were times at the very beginning, before we settled into a routine, she'd start running down the hall and go, Theba, Theba. And I'd go, what? She'd go, I don't know. I was afraid. So again, routine of her knowing that I'm going to be here and da-da-da-da has helped create a calmer situation, less of a frightening episode when she has some misfirings. And my mom's misfirings are very fascinating, and it may happen, these particular visible misfirings to me, because they're going on all the time, but this is a visual misfiring when she calls my name, and I can tell she's really afraid because something weird's happening. She can't move. And it almost looks like she's having a stroke. Her one eye gets big and the other one gets small. And she can't see real well. And I don't panic anymore because...
If you panic, she knows there's a reason. She thinks it's a reason to panic, right?
Well, and I don't panic because things have turned out well, meaning that this is an episode. I call it like an entanglement of something going on in her brain, and it has shifted her eye, and that's why, because her eye will get real big, and the other one, and she'll be real honest with me, she can't see real well. Things are moving, and I just hold her or sit her down. At the moment, she doesn't want to move because everything seems weird. And then she'll be okay after a couple minutes. And then 10 minutes afterwards, she has not a clue what happened. So we don't bring it up. So at first I would go, are you feeling better? Yeah, why? So whatever that episode was, that misfiring, as you call it, had a real physical effect for me to see it. Have you ever heard of that before?
I've heard of a lot of stuff. So
yeah.
And the beauty is, you, Theba, is like you've done enough research, pay attention, and like I don't want to say like I don't like to say like everything is a sign, a symptom, but there's a lot of symptoms that people don't realize that are symptoms because it is a brain impairment, right? So a lot of things that people like, why did this happen? Or why is that? Because they don't view or have not been defined as a brain impairment. So when you see stuff like that, you kind of like, what's going on? Is something else wrong? And usually not. It's just a symptom.
Yeah, it's just for me, it's a one that I can physically see, not necessarily hear because she's forgotten something or memory. My dad's was an obvious physical impairment because of his shaking with the Parkinson's and also hallucinations. I always thought it was, now that I understand more, there would be so many times I'd be sitting with my dad and he'd just look over at me. And now I didn't really understand that, right? I didn't understand was he seeing me sometimes, or was he seeing like a choir of people behind me? Because one time he told my brother he saw a rainforest in the kitchen. And, of course, he saw pets and bugs. Bugs apparently are the most common.
Yeah.
But the way he would look at me, makes sense now what you're saying. He's processing. I don't know if he knows it's me, or if he knows it's me, do I have three heads? It's just because his look would be so strange.
I think so. I also facilitate a Parkinson's support group with the loved one and the person living with Parkinson's, and to me, the hallucinations are fascinating. If lack of a better word, is like a lot of times they can figure out that it's not real, but it takes steps, right, to figure out if it's real. And sometimes would ask spouses and children, like, is this like real? Because there's not a three-headed person, but sometimes you see that, right? Or they're having a dream that's really active, so it seems real to them, right? So like, is that real? So that's fascinating that although the brain is giving off a hallucination, sometimes their ability to kind of think through it is like, question, is it real?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my dad, I was with him and he had some blood drawn. Guy was real nice. We'd been there before. My dad had been a tennis player all his life, so he had really bad arthritis in the thumb area. But boy, he thought that man had broken his finger. Now, of course, it wasn't right then. It was like later that afternoon, and for days. Theba, I think my finger's broken. He broke it when he was taking blood. And you have to be real careful.
You have to.
Because you don't want to play into it, because obviously his finger's not broken and you care, but you don't want to talk down to him like he's an idiot because his finger's not. It's just because he watches, like you said, they're very into watching emotions, hearing tones to know what to think or believe or how they should feel. And so I would patiently say, well, Dad, can you bend it? And he could. And then I'd say, well, you have arthritis from years of tennis. And you could tell he wasn't buying it. But he didn't get ugly. I said it just like that. And I'd have to keep repeating it until obviously it was fine and we got off that subject. But, it's like when he first saw what he described as centipedes the size of his hand on the ceiling at the apartment. And at first I was like, are there centipedes that big? And how did they get in the apartment? Because it was so real to him.
Yes.
And again, this is me understanding the hallucination aspect of this disease. And so I went and talked to the office, and they were like, centipedes? And I was like, yeah, or maybe it's a big roach. I don't know. It's like, but I tried to, once I figured that can't be true, I said, well, Dad, maybe it's a reflection of the lights off of the parking lot car or something, and it's hitting your ceiling. And But he was convinced for a while. He did get off of that. And then I just realized it's really difficult because emotional, intelligence, you want to treat them with dignity and respect and hear them when they have a concern. And the reason you want to do that is because if they're in assisted living or anywhere else or being cared for by a stranger, and they say something, you don't want to just disregard it as being part of the disease because it could be important. It could be serious. There could be, which I even hate to say, abuse, or they're just not connecting with the person, or the person really did burn their food. I don't know. It's like you have to listen and do the best you can to figure out what is truth. Because obviously Dad lived in an apartment complex and he had full-time care, but every U-Haul truck was a robbery. Theba, you see that truck? They've been taking furniture all day out of there. They're being robbed. He believed it.
Yeah. And the other thing about the dignity and respect is, like, we all want to be validated. So, and validation is important. If I say something and you tell me it's not true or you disregard it, like you have no dignity for me, right? So validation in some way is important, and not making them feel like something's wrong with them. Because, like, the reality is we can make people feel like something's wrong with them even when there's not anything wrong with us, right? So they're going through a disease process and processing, and, we see the outside signs and symptoms. Just like, sometimes I think about, like, how much lost do they feel? How lost could they feel? So I don't know if this is with, like, no offense to anyone, but, like, culturally, I think about, okay, what would happen if I today was dropped in Afghanistan? And I use that because they dress different, like, everybody's covered, they speak a different language, they eat different food, and just, like, drop me off there in the middle. I'm lost. Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, they're buildings.
Scary.
It's scary, right? So imagine that they're in a world that they don't understand. Right? So when you can kind of put yourself at least in a place where they feel lost, they're not understanding some point of the language, the communication, because of processing. What they're saying may not make sense. Like, there's so many aspects that we don't get. So I've talked to people, and someone told me just a few weeks ago that their dad was having conflict with the person, this old man. Right? So I don't know what's up with this old man, but he was looking in the mirror, and he was having an argument with the old man in the mirror because he does not see himself as the person in the mirror, right? So if he's 20, 25, 40 in his brain, he's like,
Who is this person?
Who is this person? But think about this as well. Our world has changed so much. Like, our furniture doesn't look like 1970, or,
Right.
Like, our hairstyles are different. Like, if you go back, you can't really get in the brain like, okay, if he thinks it's 1970, what does 1970 look like? And if he's looking around, like, this does not look like 1970.
Yeah, and since my brother's not around a lot, because he lives in Hawaii, if I'm on Facebook and a memory pops up and there's a picture of my brother, she's like, "Who's that?" And again, she's looking from the side, and I'll go, "It's Michael." "Oh goodness, is that Michael?" Because my gut is telling me that she's seeing a younger Michael in her head.
Yes.
And so when she first sees that, she's not recognizing Michael because he's just not around. And we talk to him every day but visually she doesn't see the changes.
No. And maybe where she is, that's not who Michael is. So sometimes you have to be careful. And I talked to some caregivers, especially children. It happens to spouses too, but they think they're 30 and their children is young, and you like, I'm your child, but you're 50. Like, how can you be their child when they think they're 30? That doesn't add up, right?
Yeah, it doesn't.
It doesn't. Like, even in their brain, they're like, my children are 5 or 6. Like, you can't be my child. So you may become a sister or an aunt or somebody that you may resemble or look like or remind them of. So it's upsetting. Like, if I know my children are a certain age, if I think they're 10 and then some 50-year-old come tell me that they're my child, I'm like, something's wrong with it. It doesn't add up. So the intelligent part is what we have to remember. Like, one part of the disease, as confusing as it is, there's some part of it that's like, if they think they're 30, they don't have, maybe they didn't have children. Or I remember my dad, you talked to him and he was like, you don't have children, right? So if you don't have children, if I'm 40, how do you say I don't have children?
Right, that makes sense.
Right, but now I'm 40 saying, I'm your child. You're like, I don't have any children. So how upsetting would that be?
Yeah, and again, that's why you don't push certain subjects. Because no point, it's not about being right or wrong. You got to go with the flow. You're entering into their world, so you got to figure out where their world is at that moment, and not fight it. So, Carolyn, coming to an end here on the podcast, what we've tried to do today is give you an actual visual snapshot of what's happening to the brain as it's shrinking and dying. And basically it's like there's holes that these signals are trying to get around. The other thing I think is really important, it's going to keep me on a different focus. And I feel like I'm conscious of this, but then by you talking about it, I realize I still get really focused on memory. And so it's just understanding that we are talking about processing the world around them, what they're seeing, how, without a doubt, you mentioned eating. My mother is just completely a different eater than she used to be. What they see, actually, their perception of TV, of the world around them. So we want to share this because if we give you a picture and help change your kind of mode of walking in this disease with your loved one, I feel like the more you stay on the whole processing thing, it does give you more empathy. When you start out in this, it's all about memory, because most doctors call it cognitive memory impairment.
Yeah.
And so that's how I was led into the disease, was cognitive memory impairment. And so I was focused about what could she remember, what does she remember me, does she remember this, does she, that sort of thing. But it's all about having more, again, patience and being kind. And you know what? The reality is, as Carolyn said, you're not going to know. It's just going to be the disease for each loved one is going to be so different. The stages are different. And so it's really important for you to be first kind to yourself by knowing that you're not going to understand it. Excuse me. It's my turn to have an allergy cough. Makes you more kind to them. Because, again, you're always operating, even though you're maturing, I say that to myself, with some understanding and tools, you are always operating from a place, especially if you really love the person, the loved one, from fear, some anxiety and grief. Mm-hmm. Even though those are a lot better in my world, they still exist to a certain degree, and so a lot of my responses will be from that kind of fleshy response to what's happening to her and its effect on me.
Yeah. And I think just to know, to have platforms like this and other platforms to get a better understanding of what's going on, because we do hear memory a lot. We don't take the time to really process what does dementia mean, the failure of the brain, impairment of the brain, and then to really think about, well, what does the brain really control? So when you start to really take your time and think about what the brain controls and how your body works, then you kind of oh, now you can have more understanding, compassion for your loved one. So,
well, I thank you. Always love having you. And I hear across the street now they're starting to chop up that tree. So we weren't quite sure about going outside. We didn't know when they would start to chop up that tree, but I hear it now.
You hear it now.
And so I'm glad we are inside. But thank you again. Carolyn will be with us next month and for the rest of the year, God willing. And you can always go to Alzheimer's Arkansas. They do have a hotline, 24/7 hotline as well. You can always call Carolyn. There's lots of resources out there, so you do not feel as helpless on this journey. The more you understand, it will empower you. And I'm just grateful for you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. And remember to give yourself some grace.
Good point. Good point. You're exactly right.